Hey there, Fletcher from All Things Overlanding here, and today on this episode of the podcast, I wanted to talk a little bit about exploring remote destinations, what it takes, and how to prepare. And what I mean by this is, again, if you are maybe like sort of seasoned in overlanding to new, so somewhere in like the first year to 2 years of kind of doing overlanding, there are often times, I feel like I've gone out and I felt like I was overlanding or I was really dispersed camping, but I really just went to a place and I camped, right? When you are preparing for an actual trip, like a 3-day, 5-day, 2-week, whatever, a longer trip where you do have to go to new areas that you've never been, there are some tools that I can give you. There are some tips that I can give you that will help you be more prepared and help you kind of think ahead so that when you get out there, you have a better experience and you're more ready to take on those challenges. So again, today we're talking about what it takes, tips and tricks to be prepared for your next overlanding journey. So let's get into that now.
Understand where it came from, but you got it, my got it. It began in the land of the sandstorm. I fought it, though I wanted everything to do with what you give to me. Loosening my grip.
All right, so let's start off by talking a little bit about what are the benefits of, going on these longer trips and kind of taking these challenges and meeting them head on, right? So if you aren't super familiar with dispersed camping, what that means is that you are not going to an established campground. You're not going someplace with a bathroom. You're not going someplace with roads and forest rangers and people that are going to be there to help direct you and signs up everywhere that tell you where to go. What you're really doing is you're going typically to an area like a national forest or a state forest or something like that, some sort of dispersed public land where you are allowed to camp and explore and drive an off-road vehicle. And you're going to be looking for cool sights, things to see, things to explore, and ultimately some sort of a campsite, right? So let me give you a good example. A month or so ago, I went to Overland Expo East. It was out in Arrington, Virginia. It was awesome. That expo itself is not a good example, right? Because you're going to a place. I threw it in my GPS, my normal Google Maps, and I showed up, and there were people there to greet me, and they told me where to go camp, and that was a piece of cake, right? But I oftentimes like to shorten my trips out and or back by trying to find dispersed camping on the way. And what that usually means is it's someplace that I've never been. So in this instance this year, on my way back, I ended up leaving on Saturday early afternoon because I needed to be back Sunday for some family stuff. And I drove about 4.5 hours further west from the expo and ended up finding some dispersed camping in West Virginia, which was amazing. But again, if this had been me 3-4 years ago, I would have been terrified. I probably wouldn't have been able to find anything. I wouldn't have known what to look for or what to do to find dispersed camping. I wouldn't have been prepared when I got there. My truck wouldn't have been built out the right way. And I might have had a bad time or, just not been able to find anything at all and ended up in a rest stop sleeping by myself with the windows cracked, right? So again, I'm going to give you some tips. I'm going to talk a little bit about some examples of this where you can freestyle it, right? And you can kind of just go find dispersed camping. Now, again, none of this stuff is going to be super crazy, like high level stuff. This is going to be some basic stuff for you if you are newer or have been doing this for a year or two and you're still kind of like learning and exploring. And I'm just going to share some of the tips that I've learned myself as I've spent more and more time doing this. So, I'm going to break this out into a couple of sections here. One is how to prepare, and then the other one is going to be how to sort of find them and some tips for finding dispersed camping on the fly. So let's start talking first about being prepared. So being prepared just means that you pack everything up. So like, for example, using that Overland Expo example, I knew that I was going to be in a place that had food trucks. I knew I was going to be in a place that had, everything that I would need, a campsite, bathrooms, all that stuff. However, when I went, I knew that there was a really good chance that I had plans to disperse camp either on the way out and or on the way back. So I didn't leave stuff at home knowing that I would have bathrooms there. I brought all my stuff for bathrooms, toilet paper, my fold-out toilet, all that stuff. I brought food and stuff as backup if I didn't want to buy the stuff at the food trucks or spend the sort of exorbitant prices that they charge at Expo. I had some backup food. I had my fridge with me. I had drinks with me. I had water with me. So that's part of it, is just being prepared, especially when you're going to something like an expo and there may be a chance that you're going to disperse camp on your way back. Now, of course, you can always hit a gas station. So that is a tip too, is if you do get out there and you find that you don't have something, there's no harm in, running to a Walmart or running to a gas station or running someplace and getting stuff to make sure that you're prepared. But again, I try to be as prepared as possible because When I left east, it was a little bit late, and then driving 4.5 hours, stopping and getting dinner, stopping once or twice and getting gas. By the time I got there, it was getting dark, and it actually caused a problem for me that I'll tell you about here in a second. And this is another tip for things to think about when you're traveling. So having all that stuff on me versus having to then add more and more time to my trip to go and get prepared on the fly was really nice. Like I knew that my fridge was loaded with Pepsis and water, and I had some beer, and I had food. I had freeze-dried meals as a backup, and I had some refrigerated stuff too. So like I had everything that I needed to be completely self-sufficient, even though for 3 or 4 days in a row I had been at a place that was, had everything I needed, and I didn't need to bring any of that stuff for that event. So then when I left and I went to West Virginia, the thing that kind of caused problems for me is, again, because I got there sort of late, I was coming in about 8, 9 o'clock at night. And one of the things that I didn't think about at that time was that in these more rural areas in West Virginia, those gas stations don't stay open 24/7. So as I was rolling in, I was like, I really would love to have a fire tonight. And one thing I didn't bring was firewood, because I'm like, it takes up a lot of room. It's heavy. It's going to reduce my gas mileage, my braking ability, right? If I load the truck up with firewood to go to a place where I can't have a wood fire anyways at the expo, that just seemed silly, so I didn't bring any. Plus, you're also kind of not supposed to import wood from another state to a new state. You're kind of supposed to use local wood to avoid, the bug, pest problems and things like that. So that was part of it. Part of it was that I was unprepared, and part of it was that I kind of made a conscious decision not to bring firewood. But so then I decided I'm going camping. I really want to have a wood fire tonight. So then I get off the highway and I go to this gas station, and it kind of took some doing to find it. And I get there, and sure enough, it's totally dark, totally closed. Everything's locked up. There's no one there. So then I search, and I find another one a couple miles down the road. I travel further down the road. I get there. That one's closed up too. And then I'm like, well, shoot, I guess they must close at 8 or 9 o'clock, and they're just gone, right? Now, again, being prepared though, I had my Ignik Fire Can Elite, so a little propane fire pit, and I had my 5-pound propane tank. So that's what I ended up doing. I got to camp, I threw my Ignik out on the ground, I hooked up my propane to it, and I had a nice little propane fire and a great time just hanging out, kind of relaxing, decompressing from Overland Expo. Again, because I carry that stuff with me all the time, and this isn't a humble brag or anything, I'm just saying this is kind of what you learn as you go is, there are going to be times when having a small, ammo can style fire pit and some propane may be a good thing, because you may not be able to find firewood, or you may not be able to have a ground fire in the place that you end up. So again, having that kind of saved my night. Instead of sitting in the dark or turning on my lights and having bugs attack me, I was able to have that fire and sit and kind of relax and enjoy being out in the middle of nowhere and dispersed camping by myself when I was out there. So, again, being prepared is important, because you're going to run into challenges like things being closed, being so remote that you can't get access to things. When we go down to Land Between the Lakes, once you kind of cross the bridge and you're over in Land Between the Lakes, which it's called that because there's a lake, 2 lakes, one on each side of it, and it's almost kind of like an island with a bridge in the top end and a bridge in the bottom end of this landmass, right? But once you get in there, you're an hour. At the top end, you're 20 to 60 minutes out, and then when you get down in the middle, you could be several hours away from any sort of like a town or a gas station or anything like that. So again, just being prepared and stuff is super, super important and can make your trip 100 times better than if you just kind of roll in and you don't have anything that you need. So think about those things like fire pits, like, again, the necessities, right? First aid, bathroom, tent, sleeping bag, pillow, that kind of stuff. You have to have that stuff. And I just have literally built my rig to always have that stuff with me at all times, so that all I have to do is grab a backpack and I'm on the road. All right, so now we've kind of talked through preparedness. Let's kind of go back to the other part of this that I wanted to touch on, which is, what does it take to find these spots, right? And I'm not going to go into my GPS app or anything like that and show you that, but I am going to talk through kind of how I've done that. So when I was leaving Virginia to go to West Virginia, as an example, I knew there was good dispersed camping in West Virginia, but I had not done any research. I had not looked ahead. I kind of figured that I would find something, I would find a way to go camping, but I hadn't really put a ton of thought into it. And you probably should. The best advice I could give you is, if you know that's going to be a fact. Now, I didn't. I kind of made the decision 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm like, you know what? I got a 10-hour drive tomorrow, or I could drive 4.5 tonight, stop and eat some dinner somewhere, and go and have a fire somewhere, and then just sleep like a baby and dispersed camp somewhere, and then wake up and have 6 to 7 hours to drive the rest of the way home instead of a full 10 all at once. So I kind of made that decision on the fly. But then what I started doing is there are so many ways that you can find sites. So I, drove out of Expo because there's not a lot of signal out at Expo. I hit a rest stop and I got some gas and kind of took a break and got out and I started looking on my phone. I pulled up Google Maps and I had Google Maps up and I had Google up, right? And I went to Google and I searched for like dispersed camping West Virginia. When you do that, when you start to search for that stuff, it's going to give you like websites for national forests, for places where you can disperse camp. From there, you can kind of research down. I mean, this took me maybe 10 or 15 minutes. I'm not talking about you're going to have to be sitting in a rest stop for 3 hours doing research and mapping a ton of things. I literally found like 3 or 4 spots. I looked at them in conjunction with where I was versus where my house was and where I was going. I found some that were along the way just visually and I mapped to them and then I mapped from them to my house and I made sure it wasn't like, because here's the thing, if it's 4 hours to that camp spot, but it's putting you 2 hours out of the way, and the next day you wake up and you still have 8 or 9 hours of driving instead of 10 versus 6, that's a problem, right? I didn't want to drive 5 hours away to still be 10 hours away from my home is what I'm getting at here. So, you do have to put some thought into it and kind of use some common sense as far as picking a campsite that's going to be good for you. But then when I was looking, I found this small little first come, first serve kind of like state park campground. And literally the day before the expo ended, it had switched from reservations to like fall winter mode. So that is the thing too, is a lot of these like state park campgrounds and things will be first come, first serve, where you just kind of show up and you can just camp for free sometimes, or sometimes there's like a fee and you leave it in an envelope and have to drop it off. But there are, during prime season, during, spring through summer, there usually is some sort of a reservation system and you can't just show up and camp. You have to literally go on their website and make a reservation and select a spot and be given a spot and then show up and pay for that and stay in your spot, right? But again, this one, I found one that was first come, first serve. It was totally free. It was on my way. So it was a great little spot and it was awesome. It turned out to be beautiful. There was, the stars were out. I was super remote in the middle of nowhere, but also only like 10 minutes from the highway. So like it all kind of worked out, but it just took, a little bit of common sense, a little bit of Googling, a little bit of Google Maps-ing, right? Like taking those places that I found and then throwing them in Google Maps and doing some research to figure out which one worked best. But so like all this information exists. If you search for what you're looking for, you can find this stuff really easily. All you have to do is search for it on Google, start there, and then go to your Google Maps, throw your stuff in, find a few different locations that you think, find the one that you think looks the best, have a backup just in case, right? And again, in that instance, it worked out extremely well. I had a great time. I shaved about half my trip off. The next day was a much quicker drive. I got home about lunchtime instead of dinner time, which was great. So I still had most of my day and it was awesome. And you can do that again, anywhere that you are. Now, there are some deserts out there. And what I mean by that is Ohio is a good example. A lot of Illinois, there's just not dispersed camping in some of these states. When you go out east a little bit, Virginia, West Virginia, there's a lot more out there. Out west, there's a ton of stuff, right? So you're going to find a ton of stuff. So kind of being aware of your surroundings, the surrounding states and things like that is important. But then again, you can do research, you can find that stuff. But I mean, I kind of had to learn the hard way in Ohio. I've been to Ohio once or twice and kind of tried everything that I can to find dispersed spots. And I'm sure that there are a few. I don't want to say there are none, but they're very difficult to find. There are very few of them. It's not great. And it's kind of the same with Illinois. There's a lot of cool stuff to see, like Garden of the Gods and things like that, but there's just not really much dispersed camping outside of like campgrounds. So just something to be aware of. But again, with some research, with some Googling, with some throwing it into Google Maps and just kind of thinking about your route home, you can definitely find stuff like that and be prepared for it if you're already packed up and you just are planning to dispersed camp. But so to kind of wrap this up, that is one of my favorite things about dispersed camping, right? Is like, anybody can go. I can show up in my Prius, right, and pull into a campground and pay my $20, $30 and go to a campsite and go to the general store and buy some firewood and have a fire. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not poo-pooing on that at all. I'm just saying anybody can do that. And in worst case, you can do that too. If you can't find anything dispersed, sometimes you have to do a KOA or you have to do a campground or something where you have to pay some money and you have to stay in an established spot. But with a little bit of research, a little bit of preparedness, having everything that you need just in case, you can get out here. You can find these really cool places like this little pocket in West Virginia that I found that was on a river that was beautiful. And you can just check out new places and show up and be prepared to take care of yourself, have your own fire, cook your own food, take care of your own bathroom stuff, and have a great time. So I hope that was helpful for you. If it was, click that like button if you're on YouTube. If you are on the podcast, make sure to add it to your favorites. Leave a 5-star review. That helps a ton. shows people that it's a good podcast, and I'd appreciate it. Also, if you're on YouTube, below this video will be a join button. That's just kind of a passive way to support the channel, get you early access to the videos, to these podcasts. So if that sounds good to you, check that out. Also in the description below, whether you're on the podcast or YouTube, is a link to my website where I've got funny overlanding camping style patches and stickers. So funny things like Weekend Warrior and it's Jerry Can, or Don't Burn Your Wiener and it's a hot dog. I've got some all things overlanding patches and stickers too. So if you're into any of that stuff, definitely check that out. Then if you want a more active way to be involved with all things overlanding, there's also a link to my Patreon group. We've got, a ton of awesome members in there right now, where we have a 24/7 Discord where we chat about our rigs and our gear and ask questions and help each other. And that's a ton of fun. We do a once a month Zoom call, and then we're doing 1 or 2 trips in person per year too, which is even more fun to sit around a fire and just kind of hang out. And then last but not least, there is the Newbie Overlanders Facebook group. Now, this is a totally free group to join. If you're newer to overlanding, or if you're tired of the big groups and maybe you've been doing it for a while, but you want some place that's positive and not just going to crush your soul with all the negativity, this may be a good place for you, and we'd love to have you. So check that out through the link in the description below. But again, thanks so much for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.